Hello, fellow anti-novelists. Just saying hello, hello from the little Zettelkasten, which is growing nicely behind me. So let's take a look at today's installment of Plotting Your Novel. We're starting with Act 2, so let's get to it. So the first thing we have up here is a reminder that Act 2 begins after the first plot point, which generally reveals the death stakes. As a reminder, it doesn't mean that you're actually going to kill somebody. Death stakes could be physical death, of course. It could be psychological death, spiritual death, professional death. There's all kinds of ways to kill your character without actually killing them. So whatever has happened at your first plot point breaks us into Act 2. Act 2 begins in the new world. This is the world that exists after whatever you have tied up at the end of Act 1 in order to give your character a chance to adjust to their new reality. So you're going to use 1 to 3 chapters and you're going to show passage. You're going to show your character reacting to whatever the first plot point was. You're going to show them regaining their balance and their footing. And I've made a note. The main character makes a choice to step forward. That is the hallmark of a really good kickoff for Act 2. Your character has made some kind of a choice, and that way they're moving forward on purpose, right? It's not a coincidence. That makes for good story. So they're asking themselves, how do I fit in? I fit in that I'm going to make this plan and I'm going to do things in this way in order to move myself forward. Well, of course, the plan's going to go wrong because we like throwing obstacles at our characters, but we'll save that for later. James Scott Bell likes to say this is a good place for the kick in the shins. That is a test of the stakes in the new world. So you're going to test your character by testing their plans, testing their theories, and throwing obstacles and confrontations at them. That's good story. I've got a note. Reminder of the antagonist's presence and the threat. Okay, so at the beginning of Act 2, you're showing the new world. You're showing your character as they begin to adjust to what has become of their lives. But this is not all fun and games, which is often how this is tagged. This is also a reminder there's something bad out there. There's something that wants to get your character. So always have hints and touches of that antagonist presence. We've got options such as assembling the team, gathering the theme, all of the things that are happening. Maybe there's some training, there's some tests and challenges, but your main character is still primarily reactive. They've not taken a proactive stance yet in their situation. We've got triggering their internal wound, and how do they react? Test their inner conflict. That leads to character development. I've got a note. Use this to move the story forward. So constantly testing your character, constantly poking them at that inner wound, that inner conflict, that's another way of creating tension, moving your readers through the story, and keeping people turning pages. Because everyone wants to know, what is this character going to do? How are they going to handle this? That's why we keep reading. So let's look at a few elements. You could have training and learning sequences. They're meeting new allies. They're experiencing small attacks and therefore learning to navigate through their new world. They're exploring clues and investigating. So there's all kinds of cool action that you can add, activity that you can add in these scenes that keeps your readers turning pages. This brings us to battle number 1, the first battle. This is where a challenge occurs whereby your main character needs to learn from their setbacks. They're learning hard lessons, right? They're getting their proverbial behind kicked in this first battle. That makes for good story. You're introducing subplots. This part of Act 2, this first half of the second act, is a great place to develop out your sub-characters and your subplots. So quickly over here, what are these little colored Post-it notes? If you know anything about me, you know that I love color coding. So let's look at quickly in the plot binder. This is my code key. Main character male is blue, main character female is red, pink. Then I've got some other key story elements that are also color coded. So I've got my note cards and Post-its, I've got my markers, and I've got my washi tapes. So in this case, these are shared scenes, right? So this is main male character, main female character, and I've already queued these up together so that I can drop these in to where I need scenes. Now, let's take a look at what's on the rest of the paper. If you open up this large piece of paper, you can see I folded it back so that it's not at view all the time, but it's easy to see this part that we're working on. You'll see I've divided the paper scene and sequel. Scene and sequel is an easy way for you to consider what needs to be going on. Okay, so they need to learn from a setback. Well, over here, I've got a little note about philotaxis, what it is, and then I've got some other notes about story elements. So this is a scene that I need in order to fulfill the requirements that I'm lining out over here for good story. So see how that flows? I go from what I know I need to include, make myself notes, remind myself that I need this combination of characters, and then as the sequel, they're going to do something. Maybe they do something part of their plan, and then they experience a setback, and then the consequence of what they've done will then be a note over here in the sequel to what happens in the scene. This is how you move the story forward. You flow it from the requirements to the scenes, to the sequels, and then you go again as you keep going. So let's wrap this up. The last thing down here at the bottom, around the 45% mark, is there is a pinch point. There is an antagonist attack. I've got reminding the reader of the bad guys. Okay, so by the time you get down to the second plot point, which brings you to the midpoint of your book, you need to remind your readers that there is trouble a brewing and there are bad dudes out there. Another side note, your character's asking, who am I really? What have I become? Should the main character be trying to find their true self at this point? These are great questions to ask yourself in the writing process to be sure that you're building out that character in an interesting way. Final thoughts. I've got catalyst for change, a mirror moment, which is a James Scott Bell-ism. Character says, I see my wound and I must grow past it. This is where your character goes from reactive to proactive. So by the midpoint of your story, which is the end of Act 2, your main character has taken the reins of their lives and they've committed to moving forward proactively to knock out that bad guy. So I hope this was helpful. This brings us to the midpoint or the halfway point of your book. We'll pick up the next video with Act 3 and we'll continue to build out our story. So start thinking about which characters need to be combined together, what scenes are required to move them through the story, and then what the natural sequels are to those scenes so that you can continue writing forward along your timeline. I hope you enjoyed this. I will see you next time.